Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose. And you know what? Xbox really has just been filled with surprises in 2024. Now, a lot of it's been controversial, and there's questions about their future in the console market and whether or not they've been making all of the right calls. There is a question about whether or not they're too focused on short-term gains as opposed to their long-term future. Now, we will talk more about that today, but on the opposite side of the spectrum, their lineup of games is quite busy. They just have so many studios under their umbrella now with all of these different acquisitions. So you kind of expect them to have this massive catalog of upcoming games, which they seemingly do have. But then out of nowhere, today, they just announced a brand new AAA studio that's been working under them in secrecy. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people were necessarily expecting this, but we will jump right into that. Now, do stay tuned for a Dragon Quest update and maybe even a Crash Bandicoot update. Yeah, that's quite interesting, but let's just go and get right into this. So this morning, Microsoft's Activision arm revealed a brand new AAA studio by the name of Elsewhere, and this is a really interesting studio in how they've positioned them. I think one of the big complaints about Activision is that in recent years, they've kind of hyperfixated on the Call of Duty franchise to the point that it's been in detriment to any kind of creativity. You look at studios like Vicarious Visions and Toys for Bob as two such examples. These were smaller teams under Activision that focused on some of their other IP, franchises like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, and Tony Hawk Pro Skater. They were seemingly having success as well, especially with the Crash Bandicoot series. But over time, Activision took those teams and their resources and they started to put them on Call of Duty. Activision needed those resources to feed the Call of Duty machine, and ultimately we saw what happened. Vicarious Visions, they ended up getting absorbed into Blizzard, and then you had Toys for Bob, and they chose to leave just earlier this year. Now, we will talk more about them and that decision here in just a moment, because we got a very interesting update from them. But again, my point here is that Activision has kind of lost their creativity a little bit in recent years. However, this new studio Elsewhere kind of fixes that problem for them a bit. This is their new studio located in Poland, and it's built with veteran talent that's worked on games like The Witcher, The Last of Us, Cyberpunk, and even Uncharted. So they seemingly have a lot of talent there, and it's also very interesting that this studio is actually located in Poland. Now, from my understanding, Poland is uniquely positioned because their budgets aren't quite as ridiculous as we're seeing with other studios across the industry. That has been a big problem for AAA games. I mean, if you want a California-based studio, their price tag is just absolutely absurd. So the location of Poland kind of brings that price tag down from what we typically see in other AAA games. More importantly here, though, is that whatever they're working on, it's being described as a narrative-based game. It does sound like this will be a single-player first experience, though there's kind of a twist. Yeah, check this out, because in their statement they said, built from the ground up, Elsewhere Entertainment is a premier and standalone studio dedicated to establishing an environment that inspires bold and diverse ideas. The team's underlying mission encourages everyone to explore and collaborate creatively to craft a franchise with an enduring legacy that resonates far beyond games. Now, this is just purely speculation for the time being, but from how they're describing it, it almost kind of sounds like they're planning more than just a game. This is something that we're seeing more of in the game industry. If you look at something like Fallout, Cyberpunk, or even The Last of Us, these game-to-film adaptations are kind of taking off right now, and when done right, the benefit is clear. This has positively impacted each one of these games in a major, significant way. So it's interesting to me that they are kind of going in with that mindset right away, as opposed to later down the road. From this description, they're not just planning a game, but they're thinking about how it can adapt to other forms of media immediately. Or at least that's kind of how I take their description. Either which way, though, this new studio puts both Xbox and Activision in a better position to develop new and creative ideas, and that's something that I feel like Activision is sorely missing right now. That's why I think the studio is worth keeping an eye on, and as always, if we get any more important information, I got your back. I'll keep you updated. Now, going back to Toys for Bob, though, earlier this year, Microsoft and Toys for Bob decided to go their own separate ways, and I said right away, I thought that was great news. I was not a huge fan of how Activision managed them. And yes, I was hoping that Xbox would come in and kind of fix the problem that Activision created. But either way, this kind of freed Toys for Bob up from Activision's control, all while still being able to work with Microsoft and their IP. I mean, that's the thing about Toys for Bob. We all want them to work on franchises like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro. And immediately, with their announcement, they suggested that they would be a close partner with Microsoft. That way they can work on those IP that they care about so much, being, of course, Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon. In fact, in their original announcement, they seemingly teased a new Spyro the Dragon game, possibly being the long-awaited Spyro 4 that we've been asking for years and years and years. Well, interestingly, we just got a new update from them that seems to have thrown off some of those early predictions because, check this out. They just unveiled their new logo, and immediately you can obviously tell that this is a Crash Bandicoot reference. So now there's this sudden shift in expectations that they're instead working on Crash Bandicoot rather than Spyro the Dragon. And if that's what you believe, I'm going to go and stop you there. See, what a lot of people aren't talking about is the color of this logo. Yes, the logo itself is a reference to Crash Bandicoot, but if you notice the collar, it resembles Spyro the Dragon. This new logo is actually a clever combination of Crash and Spyro, and what that tells me is that they have a long-term ambition to work on both of these franchises. Right now, I kind of view them in a similar light as I do with other studios such as 343 or the Coalition. 343? That's the Halo studio. That's what their long-term ambition is, just as the Coalition mainly focuses on Gears of War. Well, Toys for Bob, the way they're positioning themselves, it seems like they will be the Crash and Spyro studio, just so long as they can keep their partnership with Microsoft, which I don't really foresee being a problem. So, ultimately, I think that this is a fantastic update for both Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon fans. Okay, now let's go and move on over to the Xbox multi-platform rumors. This has been a theme pretty much all year long, and I understand that there's still a group out there that hates these rumors. But I'm telling you right now, it's pretty obvious by this point that these conversations are indeed happening within Microsoft. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're exiting the console business. By every indication, they do still have new consoles in development, including a new handheld as well. I'm actually very interested in their take on that market. But nonetheless, another rumor has popped up thanks to Jez Corden from Windows Central. He posted up a big opinion piece on how Microsoft is being too short-sighted with some of their decisions. The closure of Tango Gameworks, I think, is the perfect example of that. I'm in a firm belief that closing that studio was the wrong decision for Microsoft to make. But I digress. As a part of the article, Jez mentioned that the plan to move Xbox games to other platforms is codenamed Latitude internally. And I know there's a debate and unease at Microsoft about whether or not this is a good idea. More upcoming Microsoft-owned games slated for PlayStation are already being developed. At least for now, they're potentially obvious games you'd most likely expect. And yes, while it's true that Microsoft is a prolific publisher on PlayStation already, it has typically revolved around specific franchises like Minecraft. From what I've heard, Microsoft is pushing for no red line for what games could come to PlayStation, and it all revolves around Satya Nadella and CFO Amy Hood's mandate to increase every department's margins. Now, this pretty much echoes what I've been saying all along. I've seen the pushback online that I'm somehow going out of my way to defend Phil Spencer, but no, that's not how I see this. I think the results are clear if you actually think about what's happening behind the scenes. The decisions that we've seen in 2024 is a reflection on Microsoft's leadership taking over Xbox because they want a return on investment from the Activision Blizzard acquisition. That acquisition was massive for them, so yes, this has kind of put Xbox on Microsoft's radar. That's why some of their recent decisions have contradicted some of Xbox's past statements. It's because it's not Phil Spencer and Team Xbox calling the shots anymore. So no, they didn't intentionally lie to fans. It's just because these decisions in 2024 are being made from Microsoft, the company, and not Team Xbox. Nonetheless, though, regardless of where these decisions are coming from, this article basically says that yes, more Xbox games will be ported over to PlayStation. Now, personally, I don't find this overly surprising, but what I will say is that Microsoft is kind of towing a fine line here. There have been rumors that Halo could be one of those games, and honestly, this would probably be a very successful port if it were to happen. Halo Infinite is a much better game now than when it first launched because it just has so much more content. And I guarantee the PlayStation fanbase would just absolutely eat this game up. It's one of the best multiplayer experiences on the market, and I'm sure the PlayStation fanbase would be very interested in, Xbox's biggest franchise or, historically their most important franchise. An announcement of Halo on PlayStation would have everybody talking about it. So there is logic in a PlayStation port. There's no doubt about that. I think it would be very successful. But on the other side of things, there is that question about Xbox's long-term fans and their long-term goals, because I think a large part of the diehard Xbox community would not take this news very well. Halo has been the longtime Xbox mascot, and if it were to go multi-platform, I'd imagine that would cause a long-term effect on the Xbox brand. Whether that's good or bad, that's completely up to you. But I think that's kind of what Jez is getting into with this article. Microsoft is demanding these short-term gains. But is that in detriment to their long-term health? And I think that's going to kind of depend on how you view all this. And that's why I want to go and ask you all, what do you think about this topic and the possibility that Halo could go to PlayStation down the line? Do you view that as a bad thing, or do you think that it could potentially be good for them? Let me hear it in the comments below. Now, one last thing that I do want to quickly go over here, though, is Dragon Quest XII. Recently, Square Enix announced that they canceled a large portion of their games, and there was some concern online that maybe Dragon Quest XII could have been impacted by those cuts. Its development supposedly hasn't been exactly super smooth, but you can now rest assured. According to Takashi Mochizuki, he said that, "I know some were concerned about the status of Dragon Quest XII after the write-down announcement, so I really appreciate Square Enix for issuing me a comment to say that the game's production is alive. Thank you." So, there you go. Rest assured, Dragon Quest XII is still in development, though this still doesn't exactly answer the question about Dragon Quest III HD 2D. There's still questions about that, and I'm going to go and say this. I'm personally not concerned about this game, and there's really two reasons for that. One is that Dragon Quest is a massive franchise in Japan. Even the new Dragon Quest Monsters was a huge hit for them over in Japan when it first launched. So I'm positive that Dragon Quest III HD 2D will do well for them, at least over in Japan. Even more so is that this game has been in development for a long time. It sounds like it could actually be around the corner. So I'd be shocked if they just suddenly pulled the plug just so close through its release date. And that's why, personally, I wouldn't necessarily worry about this game unless Square Enix specifically mentioned it themselves. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. Do let me know what you all think about these topics in the comments below. Do make sure to subscribe as well if you like this type of content. But until next time, peace out.